Back in the late 1980s, I used to love hearing stories from my father-in-law about his days running a trucking company. While he owned the business, he never gave up driving one of the smaller trucks himself. My mother-in-law would often ride along with him, and she witnessed this memorable encounter that still makes us laugh at family gatherings. One morning, they arrived at a customer's loading dock tucked away at the end of an alleyway. As my father-in-law was carefully maneuvering his truck to back up to the dock, a food truck driver came barreling down the alley. There was a small gap between my father-in-law's truck and the building wall, and this impatient driver decided to squeeze through it while my father-in-law was still moving. The food truck driver then parked his vehicle right in the dock area, effectively blocking my father-in-law from reaching the loading dock without risking damage to either vehicle or the building. My father-in-law walked over to the food truck driver to sort things out. He politely asked if the driver would mind moving his truck so he could reach the dock, adding that the driver could park again once the unloading was done. The food truck driver rudely refused, saying he wouldn't move until he was finished with his business, and told my father-in-law he'd have to deal with it. My father-in-law, who dealt with all sorts of characters in his decades of trucking, simply nodded and went back to his truck. He began unloading his cargo using the truck's lift gate and a hand truck, taking extremely small loads each time. What should have been a 20-minute job was now stretching well past an hour. The food truck driver finished his business and came out, ready to leave. But there was a problem. The gap he'd squeezed through earlier wasn't wide enough anymore due to how my father-in-law had positioned his truck. The food truck driver shouted at my father-in-law, calling him an old jerk and demanding he move his truck. My father-in-law calmly replied that he would move once he finished unloading. The driver then started criticizing how long the unloading was taking, mockingly asking if my father-in-law couldn't handle more than 3 boxes at a time. My father-in-law would stop completely whenever the driver spoke to him, calmly nod in acknowledgement, and then continue at exactly the same pace. Each interruption only added more time to the process. The food truck driver grew more frustrated, yelling that my father-in-law was doing this on purpose and threatening to report him to his company. My father-in-law just kept nodding and working at his methodical pace. The more the driver cursed and threatened, the more breaks my father-in-law needed to catch his breath and ensure workplace safety. Finally, the food truck driver snapped. He jumped into his truck and attempted to force his way through the gap between my father-in-law's truck and the building. The sound of metal scraping against brick echoed through the alley as he destroyed both sides of his food truck in the process. Instead of leaving, the food truck driver parked sideways, completely blocking the alley. He started yelling that this was all my father-in-law's fault and demanded he pay for the damage. My father-in-law calmly refused to accept any blame but offered to exchange insurance information. The driver responded with more cursing, insisting he wouldn't move until my father-in-law agreed to pay for repairs. My father-in-law simply returned to his truck, locked the doors, and sat down with my mother-in-law to enjoy their packed lunch. He figured someone would eventually need to use the alley and call the police. Sure enough, the food truck driver called the police himself, thinking he was in the right. When 2 officers arrived, the driver immediately demanded they arrest my father-in-law, claiming he had trapped him there and forced him to damage his truck while preventing him from doing business. When the officers asked him to explain what happened, the driver admitted to forcing his way through the gap because my father-in-law's truck was blocking him, insisting it was all done on purpose to damage his truck. The officers interviewed the loading dock workers who had witnessed the entire incident. The food truck driver kept interrupting, practically confessing to his own reckless behavior while trying to blame my father-in-law. One of the officers then told him that based on his own admission and witness statements, he was responsible for damaging his own vehicle by attempting to force it through an unsuitable gap. The officer also pointed out that he was blocking a commercial access way and creating a public disturbance. The driver responded with more profanity, incredulous that the officers weren't taking his side. The driver's continued belligerence and refusal to move his vehicle eventually led to him being handcuffed and placed in the back of the police car. They had to call a tow truck to remove his damaged food truck from the alley. My father-in-law finally finished unloading his cargo at his usual careful pace, exchanged pleasantries with the dock workers, and drove off to his next delivery. A few weeks later, when we learned the food truck driver's insurance company refused to cover the damage since he had admitted to intentionally forcing his way through an obviously too narrow gap, his food truck business went under shortly after, as he couldn't afford the repairs and had gotten his vendor license suspended due to the incident. My father-in-law always said the key to dealing with entitled people was to let them dig their own graves. And that day, he just provided the shovel. I bought my first house at 25. It wasn't luck. I lived with my parents for 4 years, saving 75 to 90% of each paycheck for a down payment. I also built up my credit to get an amazing interest rate. The housing market had just dropped, and I found a perfect property. 2,500 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, on an acre of land, with 2 3-car garages. The previous owner had passed away, and her daughter just wanted to sell quickly. I got it for $190,000, putting down 20%. My boyfriend moved in after proposing, and we were planning our future there. Then his friend and the friend's wife needed a place to stay. They lived on a mountain, but after a storm washed out one of only 2 access roads, the traffic became unbearable. They'd been staying with the wife's sister, but it wasn't working out. Since we had a spare bedroom, I offered to rent it to them so they could save for their own house. The friend had a tragic past. His previous wife, son, and sister died in a car accident on that same mountain. He'd been severely injured, and it happened right before they were about to buy a house from his mom. Everything was fine until they got divorced. The friend stayed on as my tenant, then started dating someone new. His new girlfriend used a wheelchair due to spina bifida. She moved in a week after their first date, and that's when things got weird. The girlfriend claimed she was on disability after quitting her customer service job. She'd talk about wanting to go back to school but conveniently forgot important paperwork. Instead, she just watched TV and played video games all day. When my boyfriend got a dream job 50 miles away, we decided to sell the house and move closer. I gave my tenant 6-month notice. That's when the entitlement started showing. My tenant first asked if I would sell him the house for $150,000. I explained that was just what I owed on the mortgage and I'd be losing money. He then offered $200,000, which I also refused, explaining that was just what I'd originally paid for it and I'd made improvements since then while housing prices had gone up. He tried to guilt me by saying his girlfriend loved the place because it was perfect for her wheelchair with its mostly accessible layout and wide hallways. I simply told him to find something in his price range if he couldn't afford this house. He then mentioned how his mom had let him have her house for half price, as if that would convince me. I had to tell him I wasn't his mom. The house was appraised at $280,000 and that would be my asking price. I told him he was welcome to make an offer once it was listed. The girlfriend tried manipulating me too. She'd make comments about wanting her own garden and space for her dog, hoping I'd feel bad and sell cheap. Then they stopped paying rent. My tenant claimed his employer wasn't paying him, showing union grievance paperwork. This went on for 3 months, but I noticed they were still buying expensive things. A new smartphone, fancy restaurant meals. In the 4th month, they suddenly claimed parts of the house weren't wheelchair accessible. I reminded them the girlfriend wasn't even on the lease and had overstayed her welcome as a guest. My boyfriend's mom had done some car repairs for them, buying parts and lunch, which they never repaid. When she confronted my tenant about it, he ignored her. She was like a mother figure to him, so she emailed saying she was disowning him over his behavior. By the 5th month, my tenant tried claiming I'd wronged him a year ago over some maintenance work. I served an eviction notice. He tried arguing that I couldn't evict his girlfriend because she was disabled. I had to remind him that she was just his guest. If he goes, she goes. I told him he had 3 days to pay at least half the back rent or I'd change the locks. They moved out 2 days later. My boyfriend and his mom showed me that while I could win in court, legal fees would cost more than the unpaid rent. So I took the loss. My tenant had apparently pulled the same stunt with another friend years before, claiming it was just a misunderstanding. He lost a lot of friends over this, and those relationships are permanently damaged. Now, when we see them at parties, they know exactly why people keep their distance. I'm convinced his girlfriend masterminded this after finding out I owned the house. The timing was suspicious. They stopped paying rent right after she learned I was the owner. They didn't just lose money, they lost an entire support system of friends who would have helped them through tough times. No amount of rent money could buy that back. I guess you could say it all started when I was a kid. My mother was always convinced there was something wrong with me, dragging me to doctor after doctor for every little sneeze or cough. It kind of rubbed off on me, you know? By the time I was in my 30s, I was spending more time in waiting rooms than at my actual job. Every week it was something new. One day I'd be convinced I had a rare tropical disease. The next, it would be some obscure genetic condition. The doctors kept telling me I was fine, but I knew better. I could feel it in my bones, literally. Something was wrong, and these so-called medical professionals were either too incompetent to figure it out or deliberately hiding the truth. I started doing my own research, hours upon hours online, reading medical journals, watching surgery videos, joining support groups. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that the entire healthcare system was just one big money-making scheme. They weren't interested in actually curing people. They just wanted to keep us coming back for more expensive tests and treatments. That's when I had my breakthrough moment. If they wouldn't help me, I'd help myself. I started small, ordering basic medical equipment online. You'd be amazed what you can get shipped to your house these days. I converted my garage into a makeshift operating room. Sure, it wasn't exactly up to hospital standards, but at least I knew everything was clean. My wife found out what I was doing when she came home early one day and found me attempting to perform an endoscopy on myself. She freaked out, demanding to know what I was doing. I tried to explain that I was finally taking control of my own health, but she just kept screaming about how I was going to kill myself and that I was being insane. I fired back that what was really insane was letting medical vultures keep profiting off our suffering, insisting they were all in on it. She tried to get my brother involved. He showed up the next day with this intervention-style speech prepared. He told me things had gone too far and that I needed professional help, though he made sure to specify he didn't mean the kind I was trying to give myself in the garage. I accused him of being one of them, asking how much they were paying him to keep their secrets. He seemed confused, asking what secrets I was talking about and saying I wasn't making any sense. That's when I laid it all out for him, about the big pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, the whole corrupt system. Word got around in some of my online support groups about what I was doing. Soon people started reaching out asking if I could help them too. They were just like me, failed by the system, desperate for someone who would actually listen. I started offering my services. Nothing major at first, just minor procedures. But as my confidence grew, so did my ambition. That's when this guy showed up, said he had all the same symptoms I did. He seemed nervous, but they all were at first. I performed what I thought was a perfectly good appendectomy. Sure, there were some complications, but that happens in real hospitals too, right? Next thing I know, I'm being served with legal papers. This ungrateful person was trying to sue me. Me, the only one who was brave enough to help him. The court date arrives and I decided to represent myself. No way I was trusting some lawyer who was probably in the pocket of big healthcare. The judge asked me if I had really performed unauthorized surgery in my garage. I explained that I had performed a necessary medical procedure in a facility of my own design, using techniques I had researched extensively. The prosecutor pointed out that I had no medical license, no formal training, and that I had operated on someone in a garage. I defended myself by talking about my thousands of hours of self-study and how I'd watched every surgery video available online, declaring that I was the real victim here, a victim of a system that forces people to take desperate measures. The judge warned me that I could have killed someone, but I shot back that the healthcare system kills people every day through negligence and greed, and at least I was trying to help. I thought I made some pretty compelling arguments, but apparently the judge didn't see it that way. I got sentenced to 5 years in prison plus mandatory psychiatric treatment. The irony is, now I'm getting more medical attention than I ever did before. Turns out I did have some issues, just not the kind I could fix with a scalpel and YouTube tutorials. While I was in prison, my wife found all my medical equipment and sold it for scrap. Said she was doing me a favor, all that investment gone. Though I guess it doesn't matter now, they won't let me near anything sharper than a plastic spoon these days. And you know what's really funny? That guy who sued me found out later he never even had the symptoms he claimed. He was working undercover for the medical board the whole time. They'd been watching my online activities and sent him in to bust me. Talk about a setup. But I guess that's what happens when you try to fight the system. They always find a way to shut you down. Still, sometimes when I'm sitting in group therapy, listening to everyone else talk about their delusions, I can't help but wonder if I was onto something. Maybe not about the DIY surgery part. Okay, that was probably a bit much. But about the healthcare system being broken? That part I still stand by. Just maybe next time I'll stick to writing strongly worded letters instead of picking up a scalpel. I recently moved into this apartment building after landing my dream job at a software development company downtown. The rent was reasonable, the location was perfect, and for the first 2 months, everything was great. That is, until one of my neighbors developed severe insomnia and completely lost her mind. It all started when I received a bizarre flyer under my door at 4 a.m. The loud rustling actually woke me up, and I found this handwritten manifesto about how sleep is a societal construct designed to keep us submissive, and how we needed to break free from the shackles of slumber. The next day, I met the author of this philosophical masterpiece in the elevator, a middle-aged woman from the 5th floor who immediately launched into a speech about her enlightenment. She recognized me as the resident from 3B and eagerly asked if I had received her revelation that morning. When I confirmed that I had indeed gotten the flyer at 4 a.m., she became even more excited. She gushed about how wonderful it was to be awake at such a magical hour, proudly declaring that she hadn't slept in 3 weeks and had never felt more alive. When I tried to point out that this didn't sound healthy, she quickly cut me off, insisting that this was exactly what the sleep industry wanted us to think, and that they were brainwashing us into dependency. She declared that we needed to fight back. Before I could respond, she was already off the elevator, plastering more flyers on the walls. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. She started organizing what she called night shift activities in the building's common room. At first, it was just loud music and weird chanting at 2 a.m., but then she graduated to full-blown mandatory community events. One night at exactly 3 a.m., she pulled the fire alarm to gather everyone for an emergency building meeting about her new sleep-free lifestyle initiative. The fire department was not amused. The building manager tried to explain to her that she couldn't pull the fire alarm for meetings, but she insisted that this was more important than any fire, claiming that the residents were suffering from mass sleep addiction and nobody was doing anything about it. When a resident from 4A complained about having work in the morning, she berated them, calling them sleep addicts who always made excuses and accused them of discriminating against the enlightened ones. She started a social media campaign called Slumber No More and would live stream herself at night, banging pots and pans in the hallways to wake people up to the truth. She even tried to convince local coffee shops to stay open 24/7 to support the awakened community. The breaking point came when she installed industrial-grade floodlights outside her window, pointing them directly at other apartments to help others break free from their sleep dependency. When the building manager tried to stop her, she accused him of being part of the big sleep conspiracy. She started screaming that we were all pawns of the mattress industry and needed to wake up. The building manager finally had enough and called a real meeting at a reasonable hour to address the situation. He told her that her behavior was disturbing the peace and violating multiple lease agreements. She immediately cried discrimination and threatened to sue for sleep shaming. When I pointed out that she had been harassing residents and destroying property for weeks, She just got more worked up, claiming she was trying to save us all and ranting about how she had started a petition to have scientists find a cure for sleep addiction. She insisted they were going to change the world. The situation finally resolved itself when she tried to organize a midnight meditation flash mob in the building's parking lot. She accidentally sat on the hood of a police car that was responding to noise complaints, and her subsequent meltdown got her a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Turns out severe insomnia can indeed make you lose your mind. She was admitted to a sleep clinic for treatment, and the building finally returned to normal. The last I heard, she was writing a blog about the oppressive nature of circadian rhythms from her treatment facility, but at least she's getting help. The building manager installed better security cameras and changed the fire alarm system to require key access. We also got a new building rule specifically prohibiting unsanctioned wake-up calls and anti-sleep propaganda.